Hello, this is Eric Easton with Easton Horsemanship. I just wanted to share another video with you guys on some of the basics, the more basic stuff about being around a horse and leading, and just the general being around your friend, your friend the horse. So anyways, I've shown that we like to use the rope halters, and here you can see he's in his rope halter again, and I've got just a rope lead tied to my rope halter, and that I like to, with this lead, maintain some slack. You can see how I like to have a float in this lead rope, and then when I'm taking up the slack and bundling it, I like to not have a loop. So I fold it over and grab it, and then I can just put on coils here or there. But you see how I don't have my hand through a loop, so if he pulled back or something, this would come up slack and you might get caught in there. So you probably know that, but I just thought I'd point it out to you guys. Try to not have a loop in there to get caught in, because there can be a lot going on with all this rope. So the next thing is, I like to have a horse to where they can kind of, if they're paying attention to you, they can kind of follow a feel, which is, if my hand comes out here, I want him to come this way and lead off, and he'd circle all the way around there, as long as I'm giving him a place to go. If he runs out of a place to go, he'll stop and kind of face up there. And it'd be the same if I was going to lead him the other way. I'd like him to be the one that's going to follow my lead. There's not a lot of fuss there. And if you want him to go back, you can send him back a little bit. So that's kind of the first thing I like to have going before I'm even thinking about leading a horse, really. But the leading is just adding on to that. If there comes some tension in that lead rope, you see how he follows along, and then we get the slack put back in there. And if we come off this way, he'd follow me around. If I go this way, he's just gonna follow. And see, I try to keep that float. Try to keep that float in that rope at all times. And sometimes maybe he's maybe a little bit too close to you, so you might back him up a little bit and say, hey, you can stay out there. And let them stay out by themselves a little bit, so they're not always on top of you. That's a good distance to be around a horse, so that they're not in my bubble of space and I'm not in his. If I want him to be, I could bring him up here and love on him a little bit, but he doesn't always have to be in my space, so I make it kind of hard for him to be here. You see that? So that's how I like things to be. Now you're probably thinking, well, yeah, that's nice that his horse is doing that great. What about my horse? Well, it's just about being consistent and setting things up to where you can replicate a movement time and time again, and then it just becomes a learned behavior for the horse, so that if I put my hand out here to send him and he doesn't go, you might have to come in and drive a little bit. You see that? Now he's pretty good. He usually follows along, so I don't have to do a lot of that. But the driving is something. You've got the tail of a lead rope that you can drive them with, and I'm not saying like hit them or anything. You might hit yourself or make some noise with your shafts, or just this swinging like this makes kind of that whooshing noise, and that'll kind of get him moving a lot of times. You don't have to be whacking on them and thumping on them, but the first thing is you want him to follow that hand coming out here like this. You see that, how he made a preparation to go? That's what you want. Now say that didn't happen. Say I ask him to go, and then I have to come in here and send him. You see how that sending is kind of like, part of it is my positioning, and part of it is having something to send them. So the positioning I'm talking about is like my presence. If I'm acting like the alpha horse, then if I come in here like this, like, hey, I want you to move, you see how just that alone can move him. So that's kind of the same presence you need when you're doing this. If I ask him to go and he wouldn't go, you might need a presence and say, hey, get moving. You see how he kind of looked and he was like, oh, what's going on? I better get going. And then be sure and reward him for doing the right thing. If there comes a time, well, there will come a time, you put your hand out and they move like that, be sure and tell them, hey, that's exactly it. You are on the right page. And be sure that there's a nice reward for them there. So that reward is what they're looking for. And you can get that consistency for when you're asking them to go and they go. And you can from here direct the show. We can not have just circles, it can be a straight. Then it can be a circle on this end. See here? I lead, he follows. And coming back here, he's following me. If I stop, he ought to stop. There shouldn't be a lot of fuss about it. If I get going, he ought to get going. If I slow down, he ought to slow down right there with me and not be on top of me and pushing me. If I want to go back, he ought to go back. If I want to go this way, he ought to follow me. And all of that comes from this right here, and being consistent about leading them around. So you ought to be able to lead them from behind them, like this. See, I can send them out this way, take them around the corner, send them off this way. And that's my positioning. And you can even speed it up. They ought to be able to hustle if you hustle. So, anyway, that's how I like to have a horse operating, so that they're good to be around. So that you can, they're not on top of you and crowding you. And if you ask them to go somewhere, they listen and they follow. And it's not because you're being mean to them, it's because I respect him, he respects me, we kind of have our thing going, and life is good when, see that, life is good when we're together and he's behaving. So these are just a few things I wanted to show you about where I like to have a horse at as far as being around me, and I hope maybe you kind of have the same thing in mind for your horses. So I'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Easton Horsemanship for updates. EastonHorsemanship.com. I'll be putting up more videos. I've got my blogs. And if you need help with something like this, be sure and contact me. I'd love to help you out. So, see you down the road.